And since I don't see a lot of raised hands yet, so Shonda, why don't you maybe go ahead and tell us about your new book?
Of course. Um, so my new book is Liberating Love, 365 Love Notes from God. Um, I don't know if any of you grew up with that tradition of a daily devotional, or if that's anything that's meaningful for you. I I like having a little word of encouragement from God every day. Um, and a lot of the devotionals out there come from a very different understanding of who God is than a lot of us have. And so I always feel kind of torn about finding a devotional that talks as if God is a God of compassion and a God of radical inclusion and a God whose love is for everybody. And so I was getting ready to give away a devotional that a friend had given me. It's a very popular one. It's a very famous one. And as I was putting it in my giveaway pile, I found myself thinking, I wish there were a devotional like this one that helps people feel connected personally to God, but also helped them feel connected to each other and helped them feel connected to our spiritual ancestors, the people in the Bible who are some real characters, are some real fascinating folks that we actually have a lot to learn from. Um, and that it would also connect people to God's call for us to make the world a better place. And as I was thinking all of that, I heard a voice saying, yeah, you need to write that. That was not what I had intended when I was thinking that, but that was the word I got. And so 365 devotions, each with a little scripture at the top, and then a little note written as if it's a message from God directly to you. So that's the new book that's just come out from me.
That's great, Shonda. I am so glad that you wrote that because I do have some of those devotionals and they're just not. I have one that was given to me as an ordination gift from one of my best friends, and it's Billy Graham.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I can't give it away, partly
Yep.
because she put this lovely inscription
Yeah.
in it for me. And so I keep it because she's my best friend and I love her and I love what she wrote in it, but I can't read it.
Yep.
So I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on a copy of your new devotional. Thank you so much for sharing it.
If we run out of questions, maybe I'll read today's devotion to
Oh,
y'all later on.
that would be fun too. Maybe you can talk about your work with the Oakland Peace Center, or I know you've also done housing advocacy. Anything that's hot right now that you wanna share with us?
You know, I found myself thinking about you all this morning because at first I was so excited about the rain and I opened all my windows, and then I found myself thinking, there's a lot of folks who are living under bridges near me, living in tents near me. I can see them out my window. I live in downtown Oakland. And I found myself thinking about you all and the work you're doing to make sure that everyone in Fremont who is in need of shelter has a safe place to be in weather like this. So I'm really grateful for you all and for the fact that you're working so hard. And I know it hasn't been easy. Um, I used to work for an organization called East Bay Housing Organizations, and we worked across Alameda and Contra Costa counties. They still do. I'm still a member, even though I'm not on the staff. And so I went to a few Fremont City Council meetings, and there are some folks who really care about the dignity of the unhoused, great allies. And there are some folks who don't really understand it the way that you all do. And I've been really grateful to watch you all helping people understand what it means to treat all of Fremonters with dignity. So I'm really grateful for that. I will, if you're interested, share what we're hoping to do on the Oakland Peace Center's property around housing.
Sounds great. I
But
think Jim, I see Jim can't raise his hand except physically.
Literally.
He's a co-host, so I see him raising his hand, so he might have a question for you.
Yeah, could you share with us some of the books that you've written, or at least a link that we can go to see, what you've done?
Well,
Absolutely.
right here.
I'm about to launch a course related to pre-post racial America.
Nice.
So that's a book that I brought out about 5 years ago. And it's sad that it's still pretty relevant, but I found people dusting it off recently and saying it is, again, a really useful tool for them. My last book was called Transforming Communities, How People Like You Are Healing Their Neighborhoods. And it's about regular people who discovered problems that their communities faced and how regular people created the solutions to that, neighborhood by neighborhood. My very first book might be of interest to a handful of you, but it's pretty niche. It's called Room at the Table, and it's the history of people of color in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ. Because when I was in seminary, the only books of disciples' history that I had access to seemed to think that only white people were disciples, and it turned out that was not true. There were lots of amazing stories of Black and Asian and Latino and Native American folks throughout our history whose stories hadn't been told before, at least not all together. So yeah, thanks for asking.
I have a question that popped up in the chat for you.
Yeah.
How do you see Kamala Harris as Democratic Vice President nomination impacting radical inclusion of Christ across cultures?
Are you asking me as an Oaklander or as an Indian?
Both.
The question was just put out there.
Either.
Yeah, no, I'm just kidding. So it's funny. I work in spaces where the activists are considerably to the left of me. Because at the age of 44, I'm old by activist standards. And there's a real generational divide in Oakland. I have friends who, like myself, are really proud, really excited. I know when she became Attorney General, she had Bhangra dancing at her inaugural ball. There's something about, getting to see somebody with some of my experience as a mixed race South Asian bringing some of that wisdom. And I have a lot of friends who are from the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, which is a really powerful historic Black sorority that has done tons of good throughout its history. They are all dancing in the streets, excited about the fact that their fellow AKA is potentially going to be vice president. And a lot of my friends who do a lot of work around justice for trans folks, including sex workers, have said that her policies as district attorney did real harm to their community. And so it's representation matters, and speaking the truth about people's full history also matters, and it's how we grow and get better. And I think that that's actually good news, because when we have candidates who acknowledge their histories and say, here's what I've done, here's what I'm working on, I think that's good for democracy. I think it's good for the country. So that's what I think about Kamala.
Thank you. Here's another question. How can we develop storytelling abilities that are more inclusive and hopeful?
Oh, that's such a great question. I was just doing a training with some students from Purdue University, and I asked them if they'd be willing to share with each other the people they're following on social media. I found that the reason I'm on Twitter is to listen to amazing younger Black women's voices, Indigenous voices, and I know it sounds weird because Twitter is a very weird space, but because I follow the voices of people who are different from me, I learn and grow and get to hear amazing stories and testimonies. I have a friend who a few years ago chose to only read authors of color. And I thought, as a person of color, I don't really need to do that. But I tried it, and I found that my worldview became a lot more global. I was reading Nigerian authors. I was reading Palestinian authors. I was reading Kenyan authors. I was reading Pakistani authors. Um, and so even though I was kind of like, I don't need to do that. I already hear all the stories. I live the stories. It turned out to make a big shift in my life. So my thought on that is listening to diverse stories helps us tell a different story. I also think, and this is where my next book is kind of digging into. My next book is on how connecting with the spiritual and cultural practices of our ancestors can help equip us for the work of dismantling white supremacy. And I think that that's true for people of color and for white people. And I think that when we tap into the stories of our spiritual ancestors, when we tap into the stories of people who, from our ancestry, who were engaged in solidarity work, when we learn the stories that are often suppressed, even from our own histories, it helps us tell a different story for our future. I could talk a lot more about that. I'm doing a 6-week course on exactly that subject. So I'm going to stop saying that now because otherwise you will listen to 6 straight hours. I also wonder if people have their own thoughts, because I've just dumped a lot of information and thoughts and reflections. And this doesn't just have to be me answering questions. I wonder if you all have thoughts and experiences and wisdom you'd like to share as well.
Yeah, so if anybody would like to share, go ahead and raise your hand or put a note in the chat. While that's going on, we have another question. Do you have any suggestions for talking and connecting with family members who are conservative evangelicals?
That's such a good question. And I happened to go to a webinar by, some of you probably might be familiar with the organization called Showing Up for Racial Justice, or SURJ. And it's primarily an organization for white people or white adjacent people to be thinking about how to do racial justice work in solidarity with communities of color. They've got a campaign going right now called Calling in Our Cousins, I think. And it's actually specifically about how do we have hard conversations about complex political issues with family members who have different viewpoints than we do. I've been doing a lot of thinking about that because the South Asian community, which is a community I'm really active in, doesn't have a long, well, doesn't know its history of solidarity with Black people in this country. And so it's been really beautiful to me to witness some of my South Asian younger colleagues in their 20s inviting their aunties and uncles to be in conversation about why Black Lives Matter and what it means for us to show up in solidarity with the movement for Black Lives. I've been learning a lot from younger people who are trying to figure this out, and I've been really moved because they are a lot more longing for those conversations rather than thinking that they need to give up. So I've been learning from them as well. I wonder if others have thoughts.
Okay, I have a question. You, as a major principal in the region's anti-racism training, we had a couple of trainings that were scheduled for this year, but it is what it is.
This year happened.
If I could say that. Do you know if there are any plans for setting up webinars to do this, or do you need help with that? I can certainly help you out with that. What is your take?
Yeah, that's a great question. And interestingly enough, when Jan Warren from our region's anti-racism committee joined the Oakland Peace Center book club, which actually has been focusing on how do we learn to tell new stories by reading stories that are often not told, she said, I wonder if we could do this book as a regional book discussion with those same principles as a different way of doing anti-racism work, which I thought was a great idea. The book we were studying was called an African-American and Latinx History of the United States by Paul Ortiz. And it might be a great way for the region to engage in this conversation and learn hidden stories and resistance stories that can actually equip us for this moment. So that's one thing that Jan was thinking about. And I think if there was interest, we might be able to get that off the ground as an alternative to a traditional training.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I love that you asked that. Plus, the Oakland Peace Center Book Club has been what's gotten me through COVID. Honestly, it's been so life-giving.
Just in case you haven't noticed, for folks who are wondering, I just posted the Showing Up for Racial Justice link to Collect Your Cousins.
Collect Your Cousins, that's what it was.
It's the Collect Your Cousins campaign. So you can click on that and find out more about it. Those of you who are looking at the chat.
I think I see Iris's hand.
Well, I'm not seeing any more hands or questions coming up. I personally want to thank you for coming out here and sharing with us your perspectives on things and your message. It was quite wonderful. And I think I speak for the whole congregation. Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here.
And I think I did see Iris's hand. Is that right? From Leonard and Iris? I'm guessing that was Iris. Was I wrong about that?
Maybe. Let me, something came up here. Well, let me see. Let me check to see if they want to speak. I don't know if they.
Unmute yourself, Iris.
So is the book club open to other members, and how do we find out about it?
It is. I'm actually going to be sending something out and posting something on Facebook on Monday. So if you check out the OPC Facebook page, if you're on Facebook,
Okay.
that might be the easiest way to find it.
I just want to add that I've palled around with a group of women who have very deliberately read a lot of books by other authors, authors from various countries and cultures. And it's been a really extraordinary opening experience. It really, I guess because I am a reader, and reading a book, I go into somebody else's world in a really meaningful way. And that's not true for everybody. I've just found reading novels and histories and stories, and it's just amazing what you discover about the world.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, we have somebody else that has a question, but as a reminder to folks, actually we have two people, looks like. As a reminder to folks, if you want to raise your hand, I think some of you are using the reaction, which I'm not seeing because I can't see all the pictures. But if you open up your participants window, you'll see a raise hand icon. Just click on that and then I can see it on the list. I'm going to go to Glinda here. Hold on a second.
I was actually just waving to get your attention. My question was already answered, thanks.
Okay, John, you have a question.
Shonda, when you mentioned that you had been at a Fremont City Council meeting, it dawned on me that I think I met you maybe a couple of years back at one of our gatherings at City Council. You had mentioned earlier that you were planning on doing something with the property of the Peace Group in Oakland, and I'm just curious about that. You know, we're opening our navigation center here the 28th of August after a long time of getting.
Congratulations.
And it looks like it's going to be very exciting.
Yeah.
We're also doing a project called Pray Their Names. And I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's hearts, about 160 hearts that we're posting on our property. And it's about people that have lost their lives. Anyhow, so we're doing that in September. But I'd be interested in what you're doing in Oakland around the Peace property. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for the message today, too. It was inspiring.
Oh, thank you. So the Oakland Peace Center, for those of you who don't know, it's currently owned by First Christian Church of Oakland, and they've been letting the Oakland Peace Center kind of make really good use of that 40,000 square feet. There's 12 different nonprofits in that building. Well, not very much in that building right now, but they're going to be handing over responsibility of that to us. And we're going to be rehabbing that historic building. And we're part of a cohort of faith communities and community organizations that are working to build affordable housing on our property. Our dream at this point, although it'll depend on community input, it'll depend on what we can get funding for, our dream at this point is to turn the land above the parking lot into affordable housing for formerly incarcerated youth of color from Oakland that also puts them on a path to union construction jobs. Because they often get left out of union track jobs that will allow them to earn enough money to be able to stay in their hometown and raise a family here and be part of the community and continue to contribute to the place that raised them. So that's our dream, and we've been in conversation with the building trades union, and we've been in conversation with a nonprofit affordable housing developer, and we're exploring a similar model in LA to see if we can replicate it here. We've got community members who are invested in supporting it getting approval. So we're feeling fairly confident about it at this point. Which honestly is helped by the fact that we're in a neighborhood that rich people don't care about very much. And it's easier to get stuff done there. So,
Right. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, that sounds really exciting, Shonda.
Yeah.
It's reminding me a bit of the project that it used to be Mira Vista UCC. They're now the Good Table with Melinda McLean, and they're working with Planting Justice.
Yes.
And, you know, this millennial-led nonprofit that is bringing good food to urban areas and then teaching formerly incarcerated people job skills in nursery work and agricultural work. And then they're going to have someday, God willing, a restaurant and a music space as well as a worship space, all on this one former nursery property in El Sobrante. So those sorts of collaborative works with faith organizations and peace and justice organizations, I think are really, you know, making real change in our neighborhoods. And, you know, I know that our church community would love to, you know, figure out a way. You know, we were hoping that the Navigation Center was going to be a way for us to do that sort of work. So we're you know, we've got our radar out for for organizations like that.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's making the Good Table, the church, it's making their life as a spiritual community sustainable because they're partnering with an organization that's you know, eventually earning money. And that's, you know, the old models of funding our churches and our nonprofits are, you know, don't work so well anymore.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Valerie has a question. You can unmute, Valerie.
I'm working on it. There we go. Several years ago when I first met you was an annual gathering in the Northern California Conference when we did, you know, read the 3 books, and there's that part of me that says, have we gotten anywhere? I feel like, okay, I've done this, I've read these books, we had all those discussions that were fabulous, and I feel like, have we gotten anywhere? And kind of what are your thoughts? I mean, you've lived this all these years, and you're still at it. I realize it wasn't going to go away overnight, but are we gaining anything?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that because I think all of us who are in this work, and especially, those of us who are really active on the front lines, it's a question we ask ourselves every so often. I've been doing justice work in some fashion for about 25 years now. My first campaign was when I was 19, and we were fighting for fair wages for the employees on our university campus. And they won that campaign. So it was a really nice way to start my movement career, right? And over the course of my lifetime, segregation has increased in our public schools. Our schools are more segregated than they were in 1971. I have watched access to voting rights for Black and brown folks decrease significantly in the past 10 to 15 years. There are lots of issues where inequities have grown. And I was talking with a friend of mine who is an abolitionist. I mentioned to you a lot of my friends are doing work. I tend to be in the reform camp, and a lot of my friends are in the tear it all down and start from scratch camp. And we need all of us. They humor me and are very patient with me. And so my friend was saying to me, we have had 80 straight days of protests in the street, and we still ended up with two presidential tickets that are both invested in the carceral state. And I said to my friend, I've been doing anti-racism work explicitly for 15 years. And 5 years ago, I got in trouble for saying reform the police. And now I get in trouble for saying defund the police. And the people who yell at me for saying we can't say defund the police are saying what we need to do is reform the police. In 5 years, I've gotten to the point that pretty much everyone is saying, well, you can't be an extremist. We should just reform them. And 5 years ago, that was not the conversation I was having with the same folks who were in the middle of the road. And so we have these moments of, my friends have a lot more access to healthcare than they used to, even if they have pre-existing conditions. And while we're fighting to protect access to that, that's gotten better. The conversations we're having about what constitutes safety and for whom has shifted radically because of a generation of activists picking up and staying committed to that work for many years. The fact that they did and I know this is a controversial thing and not everyone's going to agree on this, so please be clear, I'm not suggesting I assume everybody here wants to defund the police. But I will say that in Minneapolis, where they did that, it was the result of 10 years of work by activists in Minneapolis, getting people appointed to elected positions, doing research on best practices from around the world and around the country, building up solid, logical, practice-based strategies for alternatives to policing that would better serve the safety of all people from Minneapolis. 10 straight years. So it didn't just come out of the blue. It was solid, good work that folks did even when other folks had stopped caring about the issue of police brutality. And so when we keep that slow and steady movement forward, and then we catch the wind of a moment like this, that's what can happen. And it also happened in Oakland with getting police out of the schools and reinvesting in social services so that kids can be caught before they get into the cycle of violence and supported in the ways they need. And that was a 10-year campaign by young Black alumna and alumni of the Oakland Public Schools. So there are definitely moments that are giving me hope. We need to tell those stories. We need to tell the stories of which is why I wrote Transforming Communities in the first place. Those stories don't get told enough.
I think as you were speaking, I was thinking about the recent Supreme Court decision to say that sexual discrimination is an umbrella that includes discrimination against trans people. That was humongous,
Yeah.
and I would not have imagined 5 years ago that would be the case on a conservative court.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, as well as the big victory, from my standpoint anyhow, around indigenous land rights in Oklahoma.
Yes.
That's the
Holy
result,
cow.
my friends, of 400 years of activism. Yeah.
Okay, so I saw Leonard and Iris's hand up,
Oh,
but I
yeah.
wasn't sure if that was from the original question or not, so I took it down. So Leonard, Iris, if you do have another question, raise your hand again. Joe has his hand up, so I'm going to ask Joe to unmute.
So I'm curious on the anti-racism training. About 50 of us all read White Fragility.
Mhm.
And there's a discussion about encouraging white people to have confrontations with one another. Confrontations might be a strong version of what she's advocating, but to call one another on things that we say inadvertently or think about through the assumptions of white privilege and that sort of thing. And I wondered if some of the training that's going to come out from the DOC or the UCC is going to look at how churches can structure that for whites to talk to whites in a more, I don't know, shout it out and look at it kind of mechanism without obviously destroying relationships. But yeah, I'm going to stop now.
Yeah, it is a good question, and what I'll say is the UCC might, because the UCC tends to be focused more on the individual and interpersonal. The Disciples anti-racism training is much more focused on dismantling systems of white supremacy. So Robin DiAngelo's work acknowledges systems of white supremacy, but what she focuses on is the individual and interpersonal manifestations of that. It's not that that's unimportant, it's very important. It tends to be where most churches stay. And I think why I'm proud of what the Disciples do is we actually say, we've got to look at laws, we've got to look at a long history, we've got to look at broader cultural issues, because the only reason those individual and interpersonal things exist is because of systems of oppression that also manifest at the individual level. So our trainings tend to focus much more on institutional, systemic, and structural racism. That doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. It just means it's the path we chose. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
It is. And I think what I'm thinking of is the kind of program that says calling our cousins.
Yeah.
Because we need to be able to talk to one another.
Absolutely.
And that allows us to act out in the world too.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And I think it's a fantastic program. I'm really grateful that they build it out, because those one-to-one conversations do matter. Yeah, it's just, we can't do all of the things, and so many people are trying to figure that one out. I'd rather figure out how we dismantle the racist constructs of the Constitution. And there's a handful of us who are talking about that. That's good work too.
Okay, Joe.
Okay, I was just going to tell Shonda I haven't seen her in almost 10 years.
That's the Joe I know. Oh my gosh. Is Rosie with you?
Yes.
Oh, hi there.
How you been?
Oh my gosh, y'all, that's family. The box was so small I didn't recognize you.
Okay. Well, we're back away from the camera a little bit. But I hope you're able to preserve the church, the old
Yes, that's the priority.
Back to kind of the way it was at one time,
Yes.
because it was in need of a lot of work some 10 or 12 years ago. So I know it's gotten a lot worse.
Oh, that's so, yeah, we're carrying on your legacy, Joe. We're going to bring that building back to life. You're going to be proud.
Well, it's nice to see you.
It's so good
Well,
to see
we'll
you
try to
too.
get by there and see it.
I'd love that.
You take care.
You too. Oh.
Bye-bye.
And as a reminder to all of the to all of the co-hosts, if you have questions, chime on in, because you can't raise your hand.
Tell you what, we're at about a half hour. If it's all right with you, I'd love to share with you today's devotion from the Liberating Love devotional.
Go for it.
So, thanks. I'm reading straight out of it. It's August 16th, John 7, verse 52. They replied, "Surely you are not also from Galilee, are you? Search, and you will see that no prophet is to arise from Galilee." And the devotion, which is written as if it is a love note from God to you, says, "No matter how many times I choose the sex worker, the second son, the shepherd plucked from obscurity, my children always seek leaders from the halls of power, people who look like leaders, people with the right pedigree. And yet I seek to build for and with you a community grounded in humility and compassion and inclusion for all. So over and over, I give you gifted leaders and prophets and preachers and even a savior from the wrong side of the tracks. Today, I invite you to look for the places where my gospel is being enacted by people who don't come from the halls of power or from prominent institutions, but come from down the hill or down the block or from a rough neighborhood. Seek me and honor me there. Amen.
Amen, Shonda. Thank you so much for this wonderful time together, for your wonderful message today. That was just, oh, I needed to hear that. And I'm going to save the chat for you because there were some really nice notes in the chat during and after your sermon. So I'll send those along to you.
Thank you so much.
And thanks for taking the extra time to be with us afterwards. I know
Absolutely.
that people
It was so good to be with y'all. Thank you so much for including me. And thanks for letting me sit with Paul. I don't get to do that often enough.
No. Well, let's do the gospel. I'm going to do the gospel.
I'll talk with y'all soon. Have a
Okay.
great day.
Take care, Shonda.
Bye.
Be well.